All right, guys, let's talk a little bit about what happened to primary care. Most people recognize there's a lot of dysfunction in the medical system, and a lot of that comes from, or starts at least, with primary care. Primary care used to be the bulk of what the medical system had to offer. In fact, if you considered it, if this was everything that the medical system had to offer, primary care was the majority of it, and the minority of care delivered were those emergencies. That would be the life-threatening situations. There's my horrible writing, emergencies. The life-threatening sort of situations that came up, but not very often. Everything else was considered primary care, all of this stuff right here. Now what's happened over time is this kind of divider, this line right here, has shifted dramatically. So instead of the bulk of care being primary care, or health care we could call it, and the minority being emergency care, what's happened is this line has moved further and further and further down until we have a system that right now, the bulk of the system is emergency care, and the minority, or the very small part of the system, is primary care. So this is the reason why most docs who were in primary care are getting out of it. Most new practitioners coming to the field today aren't interested in primary care. It's a very small field. You don't have a lot that you can do. You don't get a lot of liberty to work with people, etc. You're pretty much, primary care at this point is resignated to simply handing people off to the correct specialist. And so everyone has kind of switched over into emergency care. And this is where the specialists are, the surgeons, the hospitals. This is why on every street corner now you're seeing emergency rooms come up instead of healthcare facilities, simply because everything is about emergency care now. The problem is that as emergency care expanded, unfortunately, it also kicked a lot of things out of the system. So anything that couldn't be monopolized, or that you couldn't make a huge profit margin on, or that you couldn't just own outright, most of that was all kicked to the curb. And that would have been things like nutrition, for example. Nutrition, which used to be a huge part of healthcare, essentially now at this point is non-existent in healthcare. It's not covered by insurance companies. Your doctors aren't trained in it, whether that's primary care or emergency care. Nobody even really brings it up, and it's even to the point where a lot of practitioners don't even think it's useful at all. So stuff like nutrition has been kicked out, and everything now is about reactive care, surgeries, specialists, that sort of stuff, waiting until there's a big problem and then trying to fix it after the fact. So how do we fix this? And it's a little counterintuitive, but the solution isn't necessarily to just go back to how it was. What we need to recognize is that healthcare isn't a finite spectrum here. We have a lot more room to work with. What we need is not to try and battle between these two, primary care and emergency care, not try and take that ground back, but allow emergency care to expand as we learn and grow and understand more about how to take care of people in emergencies. But also, we need to allow primary care to expand as well. So that would be headed out, I would say, this direction. And what we do is we expand things back so that emergency care is still the minority of the entire healthcare spectrum, but expanding on it in its own right, and primary care is expanding out further and further and further as well to stay the general approach to healthcare. What that means as well is that we're going to take a lot of those things that were kicked out, like nutrition, for example, and they're going to come back into the game here. So in primary care, the way it should be, we'll just do it like this. In primary care, the way it should be, we're going to have things like nutrition, we're going to have things like mental health, we're going to have musculoskeletal therapies, We're going to have regenerative medicine. We're going to have functional medicine. All of those things that most people have to go outside of the medical system to get, even though those things are valid, scientifically proven, and helpful. Those are the things that need to come back into the system, so we have this healthy mixture of scientific proven approaches without having to leave behind the professionalism and experience that comes from the medical system. So we mix the stuff that works with the professionalism, and we get what really primary care should be. And that's what we're working on here at Hansen Health Solutions. So that's the goal, that's the kind of the vision for where we fit in, not into this tiny little space here, but into an expanded space where we can bring in a lot of the things that the health care system unfortunately has set aside that are extremely effective, without infringing on the expanding emergency care system either, but just looking at a bigger picture as a whole. Yeah, and that's it, and that's primary care the way it was, how it's come to be, and where it should go in the future.